point of view?
The meeting was...
I'm Niall Paterson. Welcome back to the Sky News Daily, where, not for the first time, I have found myself dwelling on something said by Mr. John Craig. Last episode, our esteemed chief political correspondent asked the question, can Keir Starmer ever really deliver on his first and biggest promise, that of ridding Labour of antisemitism? The reason? Well, almost a year ago, the Labour leader pledged that under his leadership there would be zero tolerance of antisemitism, of racism, of discrimination of any kind. But fast forward to today, Sir Keir Starmer has had to suspend not one but two prospective parliamentary candidates. Azhar Ali had been standing in the Rochdale by-election. The party withdrew its support after it was alleged he'd said Israel had let the Hamas attack of October the 7th happen. Also suspended, the former MP for Hyndburn, Graham Jones. Now, he had been slated to challenge the seat again until these comments from the same meeting were leaked to the Guido Fawkes website.
Fucking Israel again, you know, and I'm sure that all these people think that when they go home, but you will not get Israel over the line unless we go at them hard.
So, is the situation irretrievable? With one poll suggesting a significant hit to Labour's fortunes, a little later we will be asking what, if anything, the party can do with the director of Labour Against Antisemitism. First, please welcome podcast newbie, our political correspondent, Serena Barker-Singh. Serena, good to see you. Let's start at the very beginning here. Explain exactly where we are as of the time of recording on Wednesday afternoon. Two have been suspended, but there is talk of another.
Two parliamentary candidates, Azhar Ali and Graham Jones. Now, one is quite crucial because there is an upcoming by-election in Rochdale,
Indeed.
so there is no time for anyone else to replace him. Then it emerged that Graham Jones, who is the candidate for Hyndburn, was also in that meeting. Now, today we've learned there's a third councillor. He's head of the Labour group. He was there. There are no allegations of specific comments that he made, but the mere fact that he was in the room, the comments weren't unchallenged, has been clearly a problem for Labour. So they called him in. He's had a talking to, but we're still unclear what that really means in terms of detail. We don't know if there's an investigation. We don't know if they're thinking about one, and we don't think at the moment he's suspended.
I suppose, Serena, what will be most concerning to those outside of the party, and indeed plenty within the party, is, as the audio reveals, there wasn't the challenge. There was a complete lack of challenge. And yes, this wasn't a meeting attended by Labour Party members only. There were others there, but there were enough people from Labour there that surely someone should have stuck up a hand and said, well, here, maybe it's a counterpoint of view.
The meeting was Labour Party members, but there were senior Labour Party members, there were candidates. Also, Azhar Ali is an experienced politician. He's tried to be on the ballot twice before. These are experienced politicians, and I think people are quite surprised that the comments firstly were made and then no one seemed to have batted an eyelid from the recordings that we have. And that's concerned a lot of different people in the party. That's where the problems have really started.
Let's go through the timeline then, because of course it's been a couple of days since the allegations were made against Mr. Ali. Labour's initial response was what? It's a bit confusing to me. They admitted that there might have been a problem, but chose not to do anything about it.
He had made comments. He had a swift apology. It was a full and frank apology. He said his comments were inappropriate. Jewish Labour groups were very happy with his apology. They'd also pointed to the fact that he was an ally to the community. That was sort of Labour's early response, that he had quickly apologised. He owned up to his mistakes, and even shadow front benchers on the weekends were coming to defend him. I think also on the background is the idea that the ballot has closed on the Rochdale by-election, that he cannot be replaced. So that was their initial response. Then further comments came out, and it was at that point that Labour then withdrew their support. And that period took about 48 hours.
Compare and contrast, though, with the situation as regards the former MP for Hyndburn, who wanted to be the next MP for Hyndburn, Graham Jones.
Well, his comments came out and he was suspended almost immediately. I think there are two crucial differences. Clearly, Labour have learned over the weekend that people want to see swifter decisions being made.
100%. Decisive action, as I believe Sir Keir Starmer described himself as a taking.
Exactly. He said that he'd made a decisive action with Azir Ali, but he also pointed out to the fact that it was a huge sacrifice for Labour not to have a candidate. So they're not explicitly saying that that was part of the reason, but they clearly are saying that it was a huge sacrifice to forego a candidate completely in Rochdale above principles. I should point out also, it's not just that Labour don't have a candidate in Rochdale, but they are also pointing to other candidates on the ballot. So Labour was by all bookies' accounts, were a strong favourite in Rochdale. It's quite a high-profile election. Jewish groups within Labour are now pointing to the other candidates on that list, 3 former ghosts of Labour's past, if you will. They were all former Labour politicians, and they specifically point to George Galloway, which they say is much more of a threat to the community than anything Azir Ali has said. So it's that tension that they are dealing with now.
But if they hadn't made this massive political sacrifice, odds on are someone who'd said some deeply anti-Semitic things would be the Labour MP for Rochdale. I mean, and that's a situation that's that's simply not tenable. So I get why Labour are trying to make this point, but surely, given the platform on which Sir Keir Starmer took over the leadership of this party and the individual that he took the leadership over from, Jeremy Corbyn, you might expect him to be a bit quicker to act on things like this. Yes,
and I was talking to the director of Labour Together. They're sort of a think tank closely allied with the Labour Party, and they made the point that ultimately Keir Starmer has done the right thing. That's how they see it. No one's going to remember in 2 years' time this dithering of this 48 hours. Their point is Keir Starmer has made this big decision, this big sacrifice, and ultimately someone who'd made unforgivable comments is now out of the party.
I mean, the line this morning from, shadow front bencher John Healey was that Labour is not a party of saints. That that there are always going to be people who come into the party that later proved to have said some pretty unsavoury things. I'm not sure that washes with me. I mean, what is the point of vetting if not to ensure that you don't have individuals like Azir Ali standing for the party?
Those comments are interesting. I'm not quite sure what he meant fully by that. Perhaps he meant all humans make mistakes. But essentially, if you have a rigorous process for investigations, you do want the best candidates. You are hoping to say to people, your MPs are the best representatives of this constituency. I don't think Labour should be trying to water that down in any sense. They should always say that their MPs are the brightest and best and deserve to be in Parliament. I also think there's something interesting that Keir Starmer said when he took the party out of special measures, showing the progress that they'd made.
Just before you do, remind us what being in special measures meant, because of course this was something that happened to the Labour Party and one of the reasons why they needed to deal with anti-Semitism. Just explain the special measures point.
So the Equalities Watchdog, the EHRC, that's our own body that examines and takes stock of institutions. They said the party had such a problem with anti-Semitism that they put the party essentially in what they call special measures.
This is a result of the Corbyn years, yeah?
Exactly. 1 year ago, almost to the day actually, Keir Starmer had this big speech and he announced finally they were out of special measures. He also said that the test of whether they were heading in the right direction was whether people that they'd let so badly down feel ready to call Labour their party again. So I think that's the test really. How they've responded and whether that was the right decision, how quickly it was. It will be up to Jewish members who left the party under perhaps the Jeremy Corbyn eras, whether they feel welcome into the party. I'm not sure if that comment from John Healey addresses that really.
Sir Keir Starmer, we have to remember, and it is a point raised by the Conservative front bench, and I think fairly, Sir Keir Starmer legitimised Jeremy Corbyn by being for so long a part of his shadow cabinet. He legitimised the Labour Party as it was at that time. If Sir Keir Starmer wants to distance himself from the party that Labour became under Jeremy Corbyn, well, he has to remain on top of this stuff. And I'm just wondering whether it is a problem with the vetting process, whether it's a problem with the internal party disciplinary process, whether it is a problem with Keir Starmer when it comes to making decisions very, very quickly, as to why Labour have found themselves in this position.
So I think the initial problem with the delay has really caused Labour a bit of trouble here.
Yeah.
Because ultimately you can judge a party by its members, but you can also judge a party on how quickly and seriously they're taking this. So Jewish groups say that the fact that there were bystanders in this meeting was clearly a problem. If people aren't challenged, you cannot stamp out anti-Semitism.
Let's then just step away from the obvious focus of this podcast on the problem that Labour has with anti-Semitism, the way in which British Jews have been responding to it, and think about perhaps the other side of this story. I mean, Gaza is causing Keir Starmer problems in any number of directions. Firstly, of course, anti-Semitic comments being made from within the party doesn't look good amongst British Jewry. Then, of course, Sir Keir Starmer's refusal to countenance a ceasefire in Gaza has led to British Muslims deserting the party in droves. Is it possible, we still don't know when the next election is going to be, but is it possible that Gaza could prove a determining factor in whether or not Labour is the next government?
It certainly is becoming an issue that people really care about. People not just who normally follow politics, but outside of that. Specifically, Labour is worried about potentially the Muslim vote being eaten into. So there was one poll last week, a Salvation poll, that said only 60% of Muslim voters who voted for Labour in 2019 will now vote next time.
Wow.
And they clearly are quite worried about that. There's reports that Keir Starmer's office has begun polling British Muslim voters to take the temperature. And I think you're right, it is about this Gaza stance, that he was late in calling for a ceasefire. He seems to be on the back foot. Some within his own party, Zara Sultana, saying that David Cameron has actually been much more progressive on this issue than her own leader. So it's clearly an uncomfortable territory for Labour.
Is this recoverable? I mean, this isn't fatal, is it? Presumably not at this early stage. But if we keep seeing stories like this emerge, if we see failures with the vetting process continue to emerge, I'm going to submit that Sir Keir Starmer might have a very big problem on his plate.
It's hard to assess what the real damage is. I mean, fatal, potentially no. But I think there are areas where it can really hurt Labour. So there are independent candidates, for example, running on a pure Gaza platform in very, very safe Labour seats. Like, that is concerning, right? Labour having to think about seats that they would never have thought about before, particularly Ilford North, where that's Wes Streeting's candidacy. Leanne Mohammed is running there purely on a pro-Palestine, as she calls it, platform. And so while it may not be fatal for Labour in terms of getting into power or overall vote share, losing a high-profile MP, or the potential for that, could really hurt them in places that they weren't expecting to be hurt before.
Well, let's see what happens in Rochdale. Serena, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Stay right where you are. After the break, I will be speaking to the director of Labour Against Antisemitism and seeing if there is anything Sir Keir Starmer can do to finally get his house in order. To lose one prospective parliamentary candidate would look careless, but does too suggest a pattern of unacceptable behaviour amongst the people Labour have, let's not forget, selected, nominated, after an apparently not so rigorous vetting process to fight the election on their behalf. What do the past 48 hours tell us about the state of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and what, if anything, can be done? Alex Hearn is Director of Labour Against Antisemitism. Alex, good to have you. Look, given the events of the past few days, is Labour still a party you would wish to support?
Yes, I think this is more of a blot than something fatal. And I think it is something that can be resolved. It just needs more hard work.
Keir Starmer has been at great pains to claim that he has been decisive in all of this. I mean, I'm going to gently suggest that he could have arrived at some of the decisions that he has arrived at just a little bit earlier.
He has and he hasn't. He was decisive with Graham Jones. He wasn't decisive with Azhar Ali, which made the Jewish community very jittery because it reminded us a little bit of the Corbyn years. Don't forget, the party hasn't been that long out of special measures. So with the gaslighting from certain senior members of the party as well, saying that he had just fallen into conspiracy theory, that kind of made things worse for me and for many people that I know. Starmer did not act decisively with Azhar Ali, and that is a problem. But it's not a fatal problem, as I said.
But why? Why do you think there was this immediate reticence to act? I mean, after all, this is the Labour leader that said that he had rooted out anti-Semitism in the party, and that, given the events of recent days, is demonstrably untrue.
That's why it's so embarrassing, because he's made it central to his political strategy, and he failed on that occasion. It's really bad to fail on anti-Semitism within the Labour Party at this moment. So he really can't afford to make these kind of mistakes. I think that mistake was made because there does seem some kind of reluctance to address, or should I say, a little bit of ignorance as well, around anti-Jewish racism to do with Israel. And it's a subject which I think needs more education.
I can completely understand, and I think plenty of people listening to this will, but I suppose you will be in a better position to gauge just how widespread this type of thought is within the Labour Party at the moment. I mean, there has been some debate as to the nature of this meeting at which these comments were made. It strikes me that it sounds like it was more of a community meeting than a formal meeting of the party. However, there were party representatives there who didn't immediately speak up. And in and of itself, that must be worrying.
That is probably one of the most worrying parts of this saga, is that they all sat in a room and no one complained. The whole thing is really concerning, and it reflects what's going on in wider society as well. After October the 7th, we've seen anti-Jewish racist incidents go up 1,350%, according to the Metropolitan Police. This has to be addressed, and we need leadership, which Keir Starmer did show after a couple of days.
Just in terms of the two that have, and I have to say, so far been suspended, I think people will understand. I mean, the comments of both are reprehensible. I think people will better understand why Azhar Ali's comments fall into the bracket of anti-Semitism. But when it comes to Graham Jones referring to effing Israel, where is the anti-Semitism in that?
I'm not sure that it was about the anti-Semitism. Actually, what they should have been talking about was stuff that they can affect, stuff that can help their constituents. Because when you deny reality and you start fantasizing, then you can't actually deal with the real issues. And conspiracy fantasists should not be MPs. I don't think this area has been challenged or looked at enough, or maybe even at all. I don't think that people understand it, and I think there is a reluctance to challenge it, because the whole thing about anti-Jewish racism involving Israel is that it uses the veneer of politics to hide behind. So what you see is much of the same old tropes, but using different clothes, should we say, presented slightly differently.
Give us some more examples of that then, because, look, clearly Everyone has a view on what is taking place in Gaza at the moment. And it will be, for some, it will be a nuanced view. For others, it will be incredibly binary. But people will have a view on it. When it comes to the discussions of when it comes to discussions which could be labelled anti-Zionist, explain the link between people who question, the Israel's right to exist with anti-Semitism.
So criticism of Israel is absolutely fine. That goes without saying. That is legitimate. I think if you're talking about dismantling and obsessing about dismantling the only Jewish state in the world, then you're talking about what's going to happen to those people. And the fact is that they make this link, because that huge rise in attacks after October the 7th, the fact is the people who get attacked are Jews. So the proof is in the pudding.
When we're talking about the anti-Semitism that exists within the Labour Party, isn't it also fair to say that the left in general has had an issue with Israel and with the idea of a Jewish state since its very inception?
No, I don't think that's correct. I think actually it was the right that was mainly against a state of Israel, and Hitler himself in Mein Kampf wrote against it. The thing is, anti-Zionism is a lot older than Zionism. Even the medieval blood libel, the false accusation that Jews drink the blood of children and use it to bake their bread and all this stuff, that's anti-Zionism. In medieval times, that's long before Zionism exists. What the problem is that Zionism is Jewish emancipation. And you have a bunch of non-Jewish people dictating what Jewish identity is, that part of Jewish identity which has been realised politically. And they use very hostile terms to do that. In the 80s, we saw the same thing. We saw a campaign against keeping kosher. And it can be looked upon in that way. You know, you can say, I don't hate Jewish people. I'm just against kosher food. But who does it affect in practice? So whether it's witting or unwitting, the effect is hate against Jews.
Given all of that, how then can you ever hope that anti-Semitism within Labour ranks, given, you know, how it has been seeded, that it can ever be eradicated?
There needs to be a tougher line. I think there needs to be a clearer definition of when anti-Israel rhetoric becomes racist. Quite simply, there needs to be better vetting of candidates, because there was a failure. There were red flags there, and they should have been picked up.
Taking all of those things together, I still wonder, given that he was not quick to act, given that, you know, a central plank of his leadership has been the eradication, not the submission of, but the eradication of anti-Semitism within the party, why you are still clearly, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you are still clearly in favour of Sir Keir Starmer to be the leader, and he being the leader that can sort this out.
Look, I'm not saying that he has resolved this, and I'm not even saying that he is the person who could fully resolve this. He's taken this a long way, though. That should be commended. But yes, there is a lot of work to do. This is really a blot. There must not be another one like it. Action needs to be taken to stop this happening again. It's not acceptable. You know, the Jewish community are very jittery, and rightly so. We've got good reason. And the Labour Party, Keir Starmer's Labour Party, need to be harder about this.
What has your experience been, Alex? I mean, since October the 7th, being a Jew in Britain.
It's been horrific.
Tell me how.
I have friends who are attacked. I hear stories on a regular basis. It's difficult to even put into words.
Have you thought about leaving the country yourself? I know from a couple of Jewish friends that there have been conversations had.
Yeah.
That was that serious? So when you see this within your own party, I mean, it must cut even deeper then.
Yeah. I think it annoys me most. And it hurts.
Yeah, I can see it in your face. Alex, we'll leave it there. Alex Hearn, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks.
Now, as is to be expected, there has been plenty of coverage talking about Labour being a party in turmoil, in crisis. Sir Keir Starmer, a leader whose rhetoric on anti-Semitism hasn't matched his action. And, yeah, there's truth in all of that. No political party worth its salt should ever be losing their by-election candidate in the week of the ballot. None of this looks good. And, as we've just been hearing, Jewish Britons are worried. Yet set Labour's loss of two prospective parliamentary candidates next to the Conservative members of Parliament that have had the whip withdrawn for appearing on I'm a Celebrity, for example, for comparing COVID vaccination to the Holocaust, and a number of them for allegations of sexual assault. A plague on both their houses. That's your lot for this edition of The Daily. We'll see you again soon.
Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Sam Coates.
And we're inviting you to our homes every Sunday to give you the lowdown on what to expect in the political week ahead.
From Politico and Sky News, this is Politics at Jack and Sam's, available every Sunday evening, wherever you get your podcasts.